Victor Moretti ruled the underworld with an iron fist, commanding fear and respect from every corner of the criminal empire. But when he returned home that cold October night, reeking of another woman's perfume, he found his pregnant wife waiting in his office, silent, unshaken, and holding papers that would destroy everything he thought he knew. He believed she was too weak to leave him. He was wrong. What Victor didn't realize was that Isabella Moretti hadn't spent 6 years as his invisible wife doing nothing. She'd been watching, planning, and preparing for this exact moment. And tonight, the queen who'd been silent for far too long was finally making her move. Before we begin this story of betrayal, vengeance, and redemption, please hit the like button and comment below with your city so I can see how far Isabella's story reaches across the world. Now, let's dive into the night that changed everything. The October rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Moretti estate, each drop a tiny percussion against the bulletproof glass that separated Victor's world from the chaos outside. Inside, the silence was heavier than any storm. Isabella Moretti sat in the leather chair behind her husband's mahogany desk, her hands folded delicately over the swell of her 6-month pregnancy. The desk lamp cast shadows across her face, highlighting the elegant bone structure that Victor had once claimed made her look like a Renaissance painting. Tonight, in the dim light, she looked like something else entirely, a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. She didn't move when she heard the front door slam, didn't flinch when Victor's heavy footsteps echoed through the marble hallway, didn't even blink when those footsteps paused outside the office door. The door swung open. Victor Moretti filled the doorway like a force of nature, 6'3" of tailored Italian suits, and barely contained violence. At 42, he carried himself with the assurance of a man who'd built an empire on the bodies of those who'd underestimated him. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened just enough to suggest the evening's extracurricular activities. The scent of Chanel number 5 clung to him like an accusation. It wasn't Isabella's perfume. Their eyes met across the room. Victor's expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been amusement. He closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Bella," he said, using the nickname he thought softened everything. His voice carried that particular timbre he employed when he wanted something, smooth as aged whiskey, just as intoxicating. "What are you doing up? It's past midnight. You should be resting." The baby is fine," Isabella interrupted, her voice as level as a frozen lake. "Sit down, Victor." He raised an eyebrow. In 6 years of marriage, Isabella had never told him what to do. She'd been the perfect mafia wife, beautiful, silent, ornamental. A trophy he'd acquired when her father, a low-level enforcer, had offered her as a peace offering after a territorial dispute. Victor had accepted because Isabella was exquisite, and because marrying her had made a statement about his power. He could take whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. He'd never bothered to wonder what Isabella might want. "I'm not in the mood for games, Bella." Victor moved toward the desk with the casual confidence of a predator in familiar territory. "If you're upset about..." "Sit down." The steel in her voice stopped him mid-stride. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Victor Moretti did what someone else told him to do. He sat in the chair across from his own desk, a position that felt fundamentally wrong. Isabella slid a manila folder across the polished wood surface. It stopped precisely in front of him, aligned with geometric perfection. "What's this?" Victor asked, but he was already reaching for it, already confident he knew the answer. Divorce papers. His little bird had finally found a cage she liked better. The thought should have angered him. Instead, he felt almost entertained. Did she really think she could leave him? Did she imagine there was anywhere in the world he wouldn't find her? Did she believe she had any power at all in this marriage? "Open it," Isabella said. Victor flipped open the folder with one hand, barely glancing at the contents. Legal documents. Dense paragraphs of whereas and heretofore. His eyes skimmed the pages with the practiced disinterest of a man who had lawyers to handle such things. "You want a divorce." He leaned back in the chair, spreading his hands in a magnanimous gesture. "Fine. I'll make it easy for you. You can have the townhouse in Manhattan, a monthly allowance, Let's say 50,000. More than generous for a woman with your background. Isabella's expression didn't change. Sign it. There are things we need to discuss first, Bella. Custody arrangements, visitation rights. He smiled, and it was the smile of a shark circling wounded prey. You didn't think I'd just let you take my child, did you? Our child, Isabella corrected. And I'm not taking anything that isn't already mine. Sign the papers, Victor. He studied her for a long moment, searching for the crack in her composure. The tears he expected, the anger he could manipulate, the fear he could exploit. There was nothing, just those dark, unreadable eyes watching him with the patience of stone. You know what I find fascinating? Victor picked up the gold pen from his desk, a Mont Blanc worth more than most people's cars. 6 years, Bella. 6 years you've been the perfect wife. Never complained, never questioned, never demanded anything, and now when you're carrying my heir you suddenly develop a spine. He uncapped the pen with a soft click. I'll sign your papers. Not because you're forcing me, but because I'm curious to see how long you last out there. A week? 2? How long before you come crawling back, begging me to take care of you? Isabella said nothing. Victor turned to the signature page, his eyes finally focusing on the document with the intention of reading before signing. And that's when he saw it. The document wasn't what he thought it was. What the hell is this? The amusement drained from his voice like blood from a severed artery. Exactly what it says it is, Isabella replied calmly. An asset transfer agreement. I'm removing certain properties and accounts from joint ownership and placing them in a protected trust for our child. With me as the trustee, of course. Victor's hands tightened on the papers. The Riverside property, the Luxembourg accounts, His voice rose with each item. These aren't marital assets, Isabella. These are protected holdings. How the hell did you even know about them? I'm your wife, Victor. Did you really think I spent 6 years arranging flowers and attending charity galas without paying attention to anything else? He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against hardwood. You have no right to these assets. These are protected under various shell corporations and trusts that I've been a silent partner in for the past 4 years, Isabella finished. Ever since you needed my signature on those incorporation documents. Remember? You told me they were insurance papers for the baby we were trying to have. Victor's jaw clenched. He did remember. Vaguely. It had been nothing, just a formality his lawyers required. He'd barely explained it to Isabella before she'd signed with her usual quiet compliance. You're telling me you knew what you were signing? I'm telling you that I read everything before I sign it, unlike some people. Isabella gestured to the papers in his hand. I'm also telling you that those assets are now being transferred to a trust for our child, effective upon your signature. It's all completely legal. I had it reviewed by 3 different attorneys, none of whom work for you. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You're making a mistake, Victor said, and now the velvet glove was off. This was the voice that made hardened criminals weep. A very serious mistake. Sign the papers, Victor. And if I don't? Then they'll be filed with the courts tomorrow anyway, along with documentation of every discrepancy in your tax filings for the past 6 years, every shell company, every offshore account. The FBI has been very interested in finding leverage against you. I wonder what they'd do with that kind of information. Victor stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. The woman sitting across from him bore Isabella's face, Isabella's voice, but she was a complete stranger. You're bluffing, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. You wouldn't dare. You know what happens to people who threaten me. I'm not threatening you, Victor. I'm protecting our child. There's a difference. Isabella stood slowly, one hand supporting her pregnant belly. The empire you've built is impressive, but it's also fragile. You have enemies, rivals, the federal government breathing down your neck. If something happens to you, when something happens to you, our child needs to be protected. This trust ensures that. How thoughtful, Victor sneered. And you as trustee ensures that you have access to my money, even if you leave me. Our money, and yes. Isabella met his eyes without flinching. I've been your wife for 6 years. I've earned it. The laugh that burst from Victor was harsh and humorless. Earned it? You've earned it? By doing what exactly? Wearing pretty dresses? Warming my bed when I felt like it? You've contributed nothing to this empire, Isabella. You're a decoration, a beautiful, expensive decoration, but a decoration nonetheless. For the first time, something flickered in Isabella's eyes. Not hurt, something colder. You're right, she said quietly. I am a decoration, a piece of furniture you acquired and forgot about. And like furniture, I've been in every room, heard every conversation, seen every transaction. You'd be surprised what people say when they think you're not really listening. Victor's hand moved instinctively toward the inside of his jacket, where he kept his gun. But Isabella didn't even blink. You're not going to shoot me, she said. I'm carrying your child, your heir, the only biological child you'll ever have, given what the doctor told you about the scarring from that bullet wound in Prague. Victor's blood ran cold. That information was buried deeper than any of his financial secrets. The doctor who'd treated him had been paid a fortune for his discretion. That same doctor had died in a car accident 3 months later, an accident Victor had arranged. How do you know about that? His voice was barely a whisper. I know everything, Victor. That's what you never understood. While you were building your empire, I was mapping every brick of it, every weakness, every vulnerability, every secret. She moved around the desk, closer to him now. Close enough that he could smell her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, familiar and suddenly alien. I'm not your enemy, Isabella continued. I'm the mother of your child. I'm trying to protect our family, but I'm done being invisible. I'm done being underestimated. Sign the papers or don't. Either way, those assets are protected. The only question is whether you want to be seen as a man who provides for his child or one who has to be forced. Victor looked down at the papers in his hand. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that he should call his lawyers, review every line, understand exactly what he was signing. But another part of him, the part that had built an empire on calculated risks and shows of strength, refused to show weakness to his wife, to let her think she'd won. Fine, he said, and signed his name with an aggressive flourish. Take your blood money. Protect the baby. But understand this, Isabella, you just declared war on me, and I've never lost a war. Isabella took the papers from him, checking the signature with clinical precision. When she was satisfied, she slid them back into the folder and held it against her chest like armor. This isn't war, Victor. If it were war, you'd already be dead. She walked toward the door, her movement slow and careful with the weight of pregnancy. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at him. Your girlfriend's name is Luna Vale. She works at the Azure Club downtown, but she was born Svetlana Volkov in Moscow. Her uncle is Dmitry Volkov. The name hit Victor like a physical blow. Dmitry Volkov, the Russian arms dealer who'd been trying to move into Victor's territory for the past 2 years. The man who'd sworn vengeance after Victor had intercepted a major weapons shipment and kept the merchandise for himself. That's impossible, Victor breathed. I've had Luna investigated. Her background is clean. She's just a very convincing plant, Isabella finished. The background is real. Svetlana Volkov died in a car accident 6 years ago. Your Luna stole her identity. The real question is, what information have you shared with her? What access have you given her? How deeply has she infiltrated your operations? Victor's mind raced, replaying every conversation, every pillow talk confession, every moment he'd been careless because he'd thought Luna was just a beautiful distraction. How long have you known? He demanded. 3 months, Isabella said. Since the night she conveniently spilled wine on you at the Riverside Gala and you took her to the coat room. I had her followed. Within a week, I knew who she really was. I've been monitoring her communications ever since. And you said nothing? You just watched? Isabella's smile was small and utterly without warmth. I wanted to see how far she'd get, how much you'd give her, how easily you'd betray your own empire for a pretty face and a warm body. She touched her pregnant belly. I wanted to know who the father of my child really was. I would never, Victor started, but Isabella cut him off with a look. You already did, Victor. You've been feeding her information for months. She knows about the shipment coming in through Port Newark next week. She knows about your meeting with the Colombian suppliers. She knows that you're planning to eliminate the Castellano family's leadership and take over their territory. Each revelation was a knife between the ribs. Victor had shared all of that with Luna, had whispered it in the darkness, pleased by her apparent interest in his work, flattered by her admiration. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because I'm done watching," Isabella said simply. "Because I'm tired of pretending I don't see what you are. And because our child deserves better than a father who's too arrogant to see the knife at his own throat." She opened the door, then paused one final time. "I'm not leaving you, Victor, not yet. But I'm not the woman you married anymore. That woman was a fantasy you created, quiet, obedient, powerless. She never existed. And if you want any chance of salvaging what we have, you'll need to accept the reality of who I actually am." With that, Isabella Moretti walked out of the office, leaving her husband standing in the wreckage of every assumption he'd ever made about her. Victor remained frozen for a long moment, his mind struggling to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. Then, moving on pure instinct, he pulled out his phone and dialed. "It's me," he said when the call connected. "I need complete background on Luna Vale. Everything, and I mean everything. Financials, communications, associations. I want to know every person she's talked to in the past 6 months." He listened to the response, his jaw tightening. "I don't care what time it is. I want it by morning." He ended the call and immediately dialed another number. "Tony, it's Victor. I need you to pull surveillance footage from my home office for the past 3 months. Every camera, every angle. Because if Isabella was telling the truth, if she really had been watching, listening, documenting everything, then there would be evidence, there would be proof. And Victor Moretti didn't act without proof. But even as he made the calls, even as he began the process of verification, a cold certainty settled in his gut. Isabella wasn't bluffing. She'd never bluffed about anything in her life. She'd simply stayed silent until the moment she was ready to speak. And when she spoke, the world shifted. Boset. The morning light found Isabella in the greenhouse, surrounded by orchids and silence. This had always been her sanctuary, the one place in the sprawling Moretti estate that was entirely hers. Victor never came here. He found the flowers boring, the air too humid, the pace too slow. It was perfect. Isabella moved between the plants with practiced ease, checking soil moisture, adjusting humidity levels, removing dead blooms. Each action was meditation, a return to center after the chaos of the previous night. She heard the greenhouse door open but didn't turn. She knew those footsteps. "Mrs. Moretti," said a soft voice behind her. "You should be resting." "I'm fine, Marie." Isabella smiled at the older woman who served as both housekeeper and the closest thing she had to family in this place. "The baby and I are both fine." Marie moved closer, her weathered face creased with concern. She was 63 years old and had worked for the Moretti family since Victor was a child. She'd watched him grow from a ruthless boy into a ruthless man, and she'd watched Isabella transform from a frightened bride into something else entirely. "Mr. Moretti has made 17 phone calls since 4 a.m., Marie said quietly. "He's had people running background checks, pulling surveillance footage, calling in favors. The entire house is in chaos." "I know. Did you really do what they're saying? Transfer his assets? Expose his mistress?" Isabella removed a dead leaf from a white phalaenopsis orchid with surgical precision. "I protected our child. That's all." Marie was quiet for a moment, then, "I remember when you first came here. So young, so scared. Mr. Moretti's father had just died and Victor was consolidating power. There were bodies in the streets, blood on the marble floors, and you, barely 20 years old, trying to make yourself invisible." "I remember." "I thought you wouldn't survive a year," Marie admitted. "The wives before you, the ones who challenged Victor, who demanded too much, who threatened to leave, they didn't end well. Car accidents, overdoses, sudden disappearances. And you were so small, so fragile." Isabella finally turned to look at the older woman. "Did I seem fragile last night?" Marie's laugh was low and knowing. "No, child. Last night you seemed like the most dangerous person in this house. That's what worries me. Don't be worried, Marie. Everything is exactly as it should be." "Is it?" Marie moved closer, lowering her voice even though they were alone. "Victor Moretti doesn't lose, Isabella. He doesn't accept defeats. When people challenge him, He destroys them. You know this. I know you know this. He's not going to destroy the mother of his child. Are you sure about that? The question hung in the humid air between them. Isabella considered it with the same careful attention she gave her orchids, examining every angle, every possibility, every potential outcome. Victor's greatest weakness, Isabella said finally, is his absolute certainty in his own power. He believes he's invincible because he's never been truly challenged, not by anyone who mattered. His enemies attack from the outside. They're predictable. But I've been inside his walls for 6 years. I know every defense, every vulnerability, every pressure point. That's what I'm afraid of, Marie whispered, because he'll realize that eventually. And when he does, it will be too late. Isabella's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled. A real smile this time. Not the careful performance she'd perfected over 6 years of marriage. Is that your lawyer? Marie asked. No, it's Luna Vale. Marie's eyes widened. The mistress? Why is she texting you? Because I sent her a message this morning, from an anonymous number, telling her that Victor knows who she really is. Isabella showed Marie the response on her screen. Who is this? What are you talking about? You're warning her? I'm accelerating the timeline, Isabella corrected. Luna's smart. She'll realize her cover is blown. She'll either run or make a desperate move to complete her mission before Victor can act. Either way, she'll expose herself and her handler. And if she runs? She won't. The Volkov family doesn't accept failure. If Luna runs without completing her objective, her uncle will kill her himself. She'll try one last gamble, something big, something that will either destroy Victor or force him to show weakness. Marie shook her head in amazement. You've thought of everything. Not everything, Isabella admitted, but enough. Victor taught me one very important lesson over these 6 years, even if he didn't mean to. In this world, you're either predator or prey. There's no middle ground, no safety and neutrality. I decided I was done being prey. The greenhouse door burst open. Victor stood in the doorway, his suit rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He looked like a man who'd spent the night staring into an abyss and found it staring back. Leave us, he said to Marie. The housekeeper looked to Isabella, who nodded slightly. Marie left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Husband and wife regarded each other across the greenhouse, surrounded by blooming life and careful cultivation. You were right, Victor said finally. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual polish. About Luna. About everything. My people found the connections to Volkov, found communications, found proof that she's been feeding him information for months. I know. You know? Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course you know. You've known this entire time, and you just watched, waited. I was gathering evidence, Isabella corrected. There's a difference between knowing and proving. I needed proof before I could act. Act, Victor repeated. Is that what last night was? You acting? Last night was me protecting our child. Today is about protecting something else. What? Your life, Victor. He stared at her, genuinely confused. What are you talking about? Isabella set down her pruning shears and moved toward him, one hand on her belly. Even now, even furious and sleep-deprived, Victor found her beautiful. It had been one of the reasons he'd married her, because beauty was a status symbol, and Isabella was exquisite. But now, looking at her in the morning light, he realized he'd been seeing only surface, a lovely shell with nothing inside. He'd been so wrong. Luna was never just gathering information, Isabella explained. That was phase 1. Phase 2 was supposed to be assassination. The Volkovs want you dead, Victor. Not just defeated. Dead. And they wanted it to look like natural causes or an accident, so there'd be no retaliation, no war. Victor's hand moved instinctively to his chest, as if checking for a bullet hole. How? Poison. Slow acting. Already in your system. Isabella watched his face pale. Don't worry, you're not dying. I've been swapping your vitamins with placebos for the past month, ever since I confirmed Luna had access to them. The real poison is in a safe place. Evidence. The greenhouse seemed to tilt around Victor. You saved my life. I saved our child from growing up without a father. There's a difference. Is there? Victor moved closer, studying his wife's face with new eyes. Who are you, Isabella? Who the hell are you really? For a long moment, Isabella said nothing. Then she spoke, and her voice carried the weight of 6 years of silence. I'm the daughter of Marco Russo. You knew him as a low-level enforcer, a nobody. Someone so far beneath your notice that you barely remembered his name when he offered me to you as a peace offering. I remember, Victor said slowly. He'd stolen from the wrong people, was going to be executed, offered you instead. Yes, except my father wasn't a nobody. He was an accountant. He'd been laundering money for 3 different families for 15 years. He knew where every body was buried because he'd helped hide the graves. And when those families started fighting each other, when they started losing track of their own money, my father decided it was time to disappear. Isabella's smile was bitter. But you can't just disappear from the mob, can you? They'll find you, kill your family. So my father made a different choice. He offered them something more valuable than money. He offered them me. You're saying your father sold you to save himself? No, Isabella corrected. My father placed me exactly where I needed to be, in the heart of the Moretti Empire, married to the most powerful man in the city, with access to everything. She touched her belly. And then he taught me everything he knew before he died. Every trick, every system, every way to follow the money. Victor's mind reeled. The shell companies, the offshore accounts. You didn't just happen to find them. I built the map, Victor. Every single asset you have, I can trace. Every debt, every leverage point, every place where money goes in dirty and comes out clean. My father taught me the language of finance, and you taught me the language of power. Together, they've made me very, very dangerous. Why are you telling me this now? Because Luna's going to make her move in the next 48 hours. Because the Volkovs aren't the only family circling for your blood. And because if we're going to survive what's coming, we need to stop pretending that I'm just your pretty little wife. Isabella moved past him toward the greenhouse door, then paused. There's a gala tomorrow night. The Castellano charity event. You're expected to attend with me. Luna will be there. I saw it on the guest list. She'll make her play there, in front of everyone. Maximum chaos, maximum humiliation. She'll try to destroy your reputation before she destroys your life. How do you know? Because that's what I would do. Victor watched his wife disappear into the house, leaving him alone among the orchids and the humid silence. For the first time in 15 years, Victor Moretti was afraid. Not of Luna, not of the Volkovs, not of any external enemy. He was afraid of the woman who slept beside him every night. The woman carrying his child. The woman he'd underestimated so completely that she'd mapped his entire empire while he wasn't watching. Victor Moretti had built his power on the principle that he controlled everything, every variable, every outcome, every person. But Isabella Moretti, the quiet girl he'd married without a second thought, the decoration he'd placed in his home and forgotten, had been controlling him all along. And he'd never even noticed. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's me," he said when it connected. "Change of plans for tomorrow night. I want extra security at the Castellano Gala, double the usual. And I want surveillance on every entrance, every exit, every corner of that venue. If anyone so much as looks at me wrong, I want to know about it." He listened to the confirmation, then added, "And pull a complete background on Isabella Russo, everything before she married me. I want to know who her father really was, who she really is." Because if there was one thing Victor Moretti understood, it was this: knowledge was power. And he'd been operating blind for far too long. Tomorrow night, at the Castellano Gala, everything would change. He just didn't realize that Isabella was counting on exactly that. In her private study, Isabella sat before 3 different computer monitors, each showing a different angle of the Moretti estate. She'd had the cameras installed 2 years ago, hidden so carefully that even Victor's security team didn't know they existed. She watched her husband pace the greenhouse, watched him make his calls, watched him try to regain control of a situation that had already slipped through his fingers. Isabella had learned many things from Victor over the past 6 years, but the most important lesson was this: control is an illusion, power is temporary, and the only thing that endures is what you're willing to sacrifice everything to protect. She touched her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palm. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The gala was tomorrow night, and by the time it was over, the entire underworld would know the truth. Isabella Moretti was no one's pawn. She was the queen. And queens don't ask for power, they take it. The Castellano Grand Ballroom glittered like a jewelry box, all crystal chandeliers and gilt-edged mirrors reflecting the cream of the criminal underworld in their finest designer armor. Women dripped with diamonds that could fund small countries. Men wore suits that cost more than luxury cars. And beneath the champagne smiles and polite conversation, everyone was calculating angles, measuring threats, and counting the knives pointed at their backs. Isabella stood before her bedroom mirror, fastening a necklace of black pearls around her throat. The dress she'd chosen was midnight blue silk that draped elegantly over her pregnant form, modest enough to be respectable, dramatic enough to be remembered. Her dark hair was swept up in a classic chignon, her makeup understated except for the deep red of her lips. She looked every inch the mafia wife, elegant, refined, harmless. The mask she'd worn for 6 years had never fit more perfectly. "You look beautiful," Victor said from the doorway. He'd been watching her for the past 5 minutes, she knew. Had been watching her constantly since their conversation in the greenhouse, as if trying to see through skin and bone to whatever creature lived beneath. "Thank you," Isabella replied without turning. She fastened the second earring, also black pearls, a gift from Victor on their first anniversary, and smoothed her hands over her belly. "Is the car ready?" "Security's doing a final sweep." Victor moved into the room, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced precision. He wore a charcoal suit that made his dark eyes look almost black. Dangerous. "I've tripled the detail for tonight. 20 men, all armed. If Luna tries anything, she will," Isabella interrupted calmly. "The question is what exactly and when." Victor's jaw tightened. His investigators had confirmed everything Isabella had told him about Luna's real identity. The Volkov connection. The carefully constructed background. The systematic infiltration of his life. What they hadn't found was proof of the assassination plot Isabella had mentioned. The poisoned vitamins had tested clean. Either Isabella had been wrong, or she'd removed the evidence before anyone could verify her claims. Victor suspected the latter, which meant his wife was even more calculating than he'd imagined. "I want you to stay close to me tonight," Victor said. It wasn't a request. "Don't wander off. Don't talk to anyone I haven't vetted. And if anything seems wrong, anything at all, you tell me immediately." Isabella finally turned to face him, one hand resting on her belly. "Are you protecting me, Victor, or making sure I don't cause trouble?" "Can it be both?" For a moment, something almost like humor flickered in Isabella's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that impenetrable calm that had become her constant expression. "I'll stay close," she agreed. "But you need to trust me tonight. Whatever happens, whatever you see, trust that I know what I'm doing." "That's asking a lot, considering you've been lying to me for 6 years. "I've never lied to you," Isabella corrected. "I just never told you the truth." "There's a difference." Before Victor could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. "The car's ready. Let's go." They descended the grand staircase together, Victor's hand at the small of Isabella's back, in a gesture that could be read as either protective or possessive. Marie watched from the shadows of the hallway, her weathered face tight with concern. Isabella met her eyes and smiled slightly. A reassurance. A promise. Everything would be fine. The drive to the Castellano estate took 40 minutes through increasing traffic. Victor spent the entire journey on his phone, barking orders to his security team, his lieutenants, his lawyers. Building walls, shoring up defenses, preparing for a battle he couldn't quite see yet. Isabella sat in silence beside him, her hands folded over her belly, her eyes tracking the city lights that streamed past the bulletproof windows. She'd made this same drive dozens of times over the years. To galas, to charity events, to performances of wealth and power that meant nothing and everything. But tonight was different. Tonight, the invisible woman was going to become very, very visible. The Castellano estate sprawled across 5 acres of prime real estate in the heart of the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The main house was a Gothic revival monstrosity of stone and stained glass, built by a railroad baron in the 1890s and later acquired by the Castellano family as a symbol of their legitimacy. as if throwing parties in a mansion could wash the blood from their hands. Cars lined the circular drive, depositing guests in a steady stream of designer gowns and tailored suits. Photographers clustered at the entrance, their cameras flashing like lightning strikes. The Castellano Charity Gala was one of the social events of the season, a chance for the criminal elite to play at being respectable citizens. Victor's hand tightened on Isabella's as they stepped from the car. She could feel the tension in his body, the coiled readiness of a predator expecting attack. His security detail formed a loose perimeter around them, 20 men in dark suits scanning the crowd with professional paranoia. "Mr. Moretti," a photographer called out. "Over here, sir. You and Mrs. Moretti both." Victor's public smile was a work of art, warm, confident, utterly false. He pulled Isabella closer, his arm around her waist, his hand splayed possessively over her pregnant belly. The cameras flashed in a frenzy. The perfect couple. The powerful boss and his devoted wife. A family man. A man of respect. Isabella smiled for the cameras with the ease of long practice, but her eyes were scanning the crowd, looking for the one face that mattered. They found her near the entrance, holding a champagne flute and laughing at something an older man had said. Luna Vale wore a dress the color of fresh blood, cut low enough to be provocative, high enough to maintain plausible deniability. Her blonde hair fell in waves over bare shoulders. She was beautiful in that calculated, dangerous way that made men stupid. Victor saw her at the same moment Isabella did. His body went rigid. "Breathe," Isabella murmured. "Don't give her the satisfaction of knowing you've seen her. She has some nerve showing up here. She has a mission to complete. Of course she's here." Isabella guided Victor toward the entrance, her movements calm and unhurried despite her pregnancy. "Remember, we want her to make her move. That's the only way to expose her handlers. And if her move involves a bullet in my head, then your 20 security guards will earn their pay." Isabella's smile never wavered, even as they passed within 3 feet of Luna. "Besides, she's not going to shoot you. Too obvious, too traceable. She needs something public but deniable, something that destroys your reputation before it destroys you." They entered the ballroom to a swirl of music and laughter. The space was enormous, with soaring ceilings painted in elaborate frescoes of angels and demons locked in eternal combat. Crystal chandeliers the size of automobiles hung from golden chains. A full orchestra played Strauss from a raised platform. Servers in white gloves circulated with champagne and canapes. It was beautiful and grotesque in equal measure, a monument to wealth built on suffering. "Victor!" A booming voice cut through the music. Antonio Castellano approached with arms spread wide, his bulk barely contained by a custom tuxedo. At 65, he was one of the old guard, a dinosaur from an era when the Mafia operated with a code, however twisted. "My boy, you look well. And Isabella, radiant as always." He kissed Isabella's hand with exaggerated gallantry, his eyes dropping to her belly with obvious calculation. An heir changed everything in their world, changed alliances, changed succession plans, changed the future. "Antonio," Victor replied with the careful warmth of political necessity. The Castellanos controlled the ports. Victor needed access to those ports. Therefore, Victor needed Antonio's goodwill. "Thank you for the invitation. Beautiful event, as always." "We do our best." Antonio's smile didn't reach his eyes. He and Victor were allies only because being enemies was too expensive for both of them. "I trust you'll bid generously at the auction. All proceeds go to St. Catherine's Hospital. Very worthy cause." The subtext was clear. Bid high, show your wealth, prove your status. The auction items were meaningless. The bidding was a ritual of dominance. "Of course," Victor said smoothly. "Isabella has her eye on that Chagall. Don't you, darling?" Isabella smiled. There was no Chagall in the auction. Victor was testing her, seeing if she'd contradict him publicly, seeing if the obedient wife was still performing her role. "Actually, I prefer the Modigliani," she said. "The nude study. It reminds me of us. Beautiful on the surface, unsettling when you look closer." Antonio's laugh boomed across the ballroom. "Your wife has sharp eyes, Victor. Be careful." "Oh, I'm learning that," Victor replied, and there was an edge to his voice that made several nearby conversations pause. The night unfolded in the predictable rhythm of such events. Victor worked the room with ruthless efficiency, shaking hands, making promises, identifying threats and opportunities. Isabella stayed at his side, the perfect accessory, speaking when spoken to, smiling at the right moments, playing her role with flawless precision. But her eyes never stopped moving, never stopped tracking. She watched Luna circulate through the crowd, saw her touch arms, lean close, whisper in ears, saw her work her way toward the center of the room where Victor held court with the other family heads, saw the trap being built piece by piece, conversation by conversation. "She's spreading something," Isabella murmured to Victor during a brief moment of privacy. "Look at the pattern. She talks to someone, they react. They look at you differently. She's planting seeds." Victor's expression darkened. "What kind of seeds? Doubt? Rumor? Something designed to make you look weak or unstable." Isabella touched his arm gently. "It's starting. Whatever she's planning, it's happening now." The auction began at 9 o'clock, with Antonio Castellano serving as master of ceremonies. The ballroom's attention focused on the stage where items were displayed one by one: paintings, jewelry, rare wines, a vintage car. The bids came fast and high, each one a declaration of power. Victor bid on several items and won none of them, letting others have their victories. It was a calculated display of restraint, of confidence, a man who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Isabella watched Luna move toward the stage, watched her whisper something to Antonio's aide, watched the man's expression change from polite interest to shock. It was happening. "The next item," Antonio announced, his voice suddenly uncertain, "is a bit unusual. We've just received it backstage, and I'm told it's a personal donation from an anonymous benefactor." A server appeared carrying a small velvet box. Antonio opened it, and even from across the room, Isabella could see his face pale. "It appears to be a DNA test kit," Antonio said slowly, "with a note that says, 'For the Moretti heir, because blood always tells the truth.'" The ballroom went silent. Every eye turned to Victor and Isabella. Victor's hand found Isabella's wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. Isabella's mind raced, recalculating. She'd expected Luna to attack Victor's business reputation, his credibility with allies. This was something else, something personal and devastatingly effective. "I don't know," she admitted quietly, "but we need to control the narrative. Now." Antonio looked directly at them, his expression a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. "Victor, do you have any idea what this is about?" Before Victor could respond, Luna's voice rang out clear and sharp from somewhere in the crowd. "I do." The servers parted as Luna stepped forward, no longer the demure mistress, but something else entirely. Something harder, more dangerous. Her smile was a blade. "I apologize for the dramatic presentation," Luna said, her Russian accent suddenly more pronounced. "But I thought everyone should know the truth before congratulating Victor on his upcoming fatherhood." Victor's hand moved toward his jacket, toward his gun, but Isabella's fingers closed over his wrist. "Don't," she breathed. "That's exactly what she wants. Don't give her that." "The truth," Luna continued, addressing the entire ballroom now, "is that Victor Moretti has been deceived. The child Isabella carries isn't his. It's the product of an affair she's been conducting for months. I have proof." The gasps that echoed through the ballroom were like music to Luna's ears. She gestured, and another server appeared carrying a manila envelope. "DNA evidence," Luna announced. "Comparison samples taken from Victor and from the fetus during Isabella's last medical appointment. The results are conclusive. Victor Moretti is not the father of his wife's child." Isabella felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not from shock. She'd expected an attack, but the execution was more sophisticated than she'd anticipated. Luna had somehow accessed her medical records, had fabricated evidence, had created a narrative that would destroy her credibility completely. And the worst part? In their world, there was no defense against an accusation like this. No appeal to reason or evidence. The rumor itself was enough. The doubt was the weapon. Victor's face had gone white with rage. "You lying—" "Let's test it then," Luna interrupted smoothly. "Here, now, in front of everyone. If I'm lying, you have nothing to fear. If I'm telling the truth—" She spread her hands. Well, then everyone deserves to know, don't they? Antonio Castellano looked like a man who'd wandered into a nightmare. Victor, perhaps we should take this somewhere private. No, Victor snarled. If this bitch wants to make accusations in public, we'll settle them in public. Give me the damn test kit. Isabella's hand tightened on his arm. Victor, wait. Think about what you're doing. This is exactly what she wants. Chaos, spectacle, you looking desperate and out of control. But Victor was beyond reason now, beyond strategy. The accusation had hit him in the one place he was truly vulnerable, his pride. The implication that his wife had made a fool of him, that the heir he'd been proudly announcing wasn't even his blood, was more than his ego could tolerate. He grabbed the DNA kit from the server and turned to Isabella. In his eyes, she saw something terrible. Not love or trust, but possession. Ownership. The need to prove that what was his remained his. Prove it, he said quietly. Prove this is my child. Isabella met his eyes without flinching. And if I refuse? If I tell you that your trust should be enough? What then, Victor? Then everyone in this room will know she's telling the truth. The ballroom held its collective breath. This was the moment Luna had engineered. The moment when Victor would either destroy his wife publicly or reveal himself as a man who couldn't control his own household. Either way, Luna won. Isabella looked at the DNA kit in Victor's hand, looked at Luna's triumphant expression, looked at the hundreds of faces surrounding them, all waiting to see what the quiet wife would do. And then she started to laugh. It wasn't hysterical laughter or bitter laughter. It was genuine amusement, clear and bright as bells. It cut through the tension like a knife through silk. "Oh, Luna," Isabella said, still smiling. "Or should I call you Svetlana? You've worked so hard on this. The fake medical records, the forged DNA evidence, the theatrical timing, it's really quite impressive." Luna's expression flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough. "I'm sorry. What did you call me?" "Svetlana Volkov," Isabella said clearly, projecting her voice so everyone could hear. "Niece of Dmitry Volkov. Planted in my husband's life 6 months ago with the sole purpose of destroying him. You've done excellent work, truly. The identity theft was particularly clever, using a real dead girl's background. Made it very hard to trace, but not impossible." The ballroom erupted in whispers. Luna's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. I'm just trying to tell the truth about a fictional affair that never happened," Isabella interrupted. "About DNA evidence that doesn't exist? Tell me, how exactly did you obtain fetal DNA from my medical records when I haven't had amniocentesis and there's no other way to test the baby until after birth?" Luna's smile faltered. Isabella pressed her advantage, moving forward despite her pregnancy, her voice steady and certain. "You made a critical error, Svetlana. You assumed I was ignorant, that I wouldn't understand medical procedures, that I'd panic and Victor would do something rash and everything would fall apart." She turned to address the entire ballroom now, her hand resting on her belly. "The truth is simpler and more boring than any conspiracy. This is my husband's child. I've been faithful to my marriage vows. And the woman making these accusations is a foreign operative trying to destroy one of the most powerful families in this room." Isabella pulled out her phone and held it up. "I have documentation, real documentation. Svetlana Volkov's passport under her birth name. Communications between her and her uncle Dmitry discussing her infiltration of Victor's organization. Bank transfers, everything." It was a bluff. A calculated, desperate bluff. Isabella had some of that information, but not all of it. Not enough to prove everything she was claiming. But Luna didn't know that. The Russian woman's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, calculation, and finally cold fury. "You think you're clever," Luna hissed, dropping all pretense now. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming? My uncle—" "Your uncle is dead," Isabella interrupted calmly. "He was killed 3 hours ago in Moscow, along with his top lieutenants. A coordinated strike by Victor's Russian allies. The Volkov family is finished." This time the lie was so enormous, so audacious, that even Victor stared at Isabella in shock. But Luna believed it. Isabella could see it in her eyes. The sudden terror, the realization that she was alone in a room full of enemies, that her protection was gone, that she'd failed. Luna did exactly what Isabella knew she'd do, what any cornered operative would do. She ran. The Russian woman turned and bolted for the nearest exit, shoving through the crowd in a panic. Victor's security detail reacted immediately, moving to intercept. "Take her alive!" Victor shouted. "I want answers!" The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests scattered. Security converged. And in the middle of it all, Isabella stood perfectly still, her hand on her belly, watching her carefully constructed trap snap shut. Antonio Castellano appeared at her elbow, his expression unreadable. Was that true? About Dmitry Volkov? No, Isabella admitted quietly. But she believed it. That's what matters. You gambled that she'd run instead of calling your bluff. She's a field operative, not a strategist. Operatives are trained to extract when their cover is blown. She reacted exactly as her training dictated. Isabella finally allowed herself to show a hint of exhaustion. But we'll see what she reveals once Victor's people question her. If she talks. Oh, she'll talk. She has to talk if she wants to negotiate any kind of protection. Isabella turned to look at the older man. You're wondering if I'm telling the truth. About the baby. About the affair. Are you? Does it matter? I've created reasonable doubt about Luna's accusations. In our world, doubt is as good as proof. Isabella's smile was sharp. Besides, you know Victor. Do you really think anyone could carry on an affair under his nose without him knowing? He monitors everything, controls everything. No, Antonio, the child is his. Luna was simply desperate and made a mistake. Antonio studied her for a long moment. You're not what you seem, Isabella Moretti. No one in this room is. Victor returned then, his suit jacket missing, his shirt stained with something that might have been blood. His expression was dark thunder. She got away, he bit out. Made it to a car, led my men on a chase through the city. They lost her near the docks. Isabella's heart sank. She'd miscalculated. Luna hadn't been captured, hadn't been neutralized. The threat remained. But we got this, Victor continued, holding up Luna's purse. She dropped it when she ran. My people are going through it now. And the crowd? Isabella asked, looking around the ballroom where guests were slowly returning, their expressions ranging from scandalized to fascinated. What are they saying? That you're either the most loyal wife in the city or the most convincing liar. Victor's eyes bored into hers. I'm still trying to figure out which. Does it matter? Yes, Victor said flatly. Because if you're lying to me about this, about the baby. I'm not lying about the baby, Isabella interrupted. That child is yours, Victor. Your blood, your heir. Everything else I might have deceived you about. But not that. Never that. For a long moment, they stared at each other while the ballroom slowly rebuilt itself around them. The orchestra started playing again. Servers began circulating with fresh champagne. The auction was quietly canceled, but the party continued because in their world, weakness was death, and showing fear was weakness. We're leaving, Victor decided. Now. I don't trust this situation. Don't trust that Luna doesn't have backup, doesn't have a contingency plan. But as they moved toward the exit, Isabella saw something that made her blood run cold. Marie, their housekeeper. Standing near the ballroom entrance, her face white as paper, her hands shaking. Isabella broke away from Victor and hurried toward the older woman, her heart pounding. Marie? What are you doing here? What's wrong? Marie's lips trembled. I tried to call. Your phone was off. I had to come. I had to warn you. Warn me about what? The house, Marie whispered. Men came. Armed men. They said they were Victor's people, but I've never seen them before. They went through everything. Your office, your computers. They took boxes, files, everything. Isabella felt the world tilt. Her private study, her backup evidence, her insurance, all of it, gone. When? She demanded. An hour ago, right after you left for the gala. Marie grabbed Isabella's hands. This was coordinated. They knew you'd be here. Knew the house would be empty except for me. One of them told me to deliver a message. What message? Marie's eyes filled with tears. He said, "Tell Isabella that the Volkovs send their regards, and tell her that her father's legacy dies with her." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Her father's legacy. The files he'd maintained. The evidence he'd spent 15 years collecting on every family, every transaction, every crime. The evidence Isabella had been using to protect herself, to ensure that if Victor ever moved against her, she could destroy him and everyone else in the criminal underworld. It was all gone. Victor appeared at her side, his expression thunderous. "What's going on?" Isabella turned to face her husband, and for the first time in 6 years, she let him see real fear in her eyes. "We need to go home," she said quietly. "Right now. We have a serious problem." The drive back to the estate was the longest 40 minutes of Isabella's life. Victor was on the phone constantly, mobilizing his forces, calling in favors, trying to assess the scope of the breach. But Isabella sat in silence, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. The Volkovs had outmaneuvered her. While she'd been focused on Luna, on the public confrontation, they'd struck at a real vulnerability. Not her reputation, not her relationship with Victor, her insurance, her protection, her proof. Without those files, she was defenseless. Just another mafia wife with delusions of power. The estate looked normal when they arrived, lights on, security detail in position, no obvious signs of intrusion. But Isabella knew better, knew that the real damage was invisible, strategic, permanent. She moved through the house like a ghost, Victor close behind her. Marie had been telling the truth. Isabella's private study had been ransacked. Computers gone, files missing. The hidden safe behind the bookshelf stood open and empty. Everything her father had given her, everything she'd built on top of that foundation. Erased. "What was in those files?" Victor demanded. "What did they take?" Isabella sank into her desk chair, one hand on her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. "Everything," she said quietly. "Every piece of leverage I had. Every insurance policy. Every escape route." "Insurance against what? Against who?" She looked up at her husband, and in her eyes he saw something he'd never seen before. Not calculation, not strategy, surrender. "Against you, Victor. Against this life. Against the possibility that one day I'd need to destroy everything to survive." Isabella's laugh was bitter. "My father taught me that in this world, you either have power or you're at the mercy of those who do. I chose power. I built a map of everyone's secrets, and now it's gone." Victor stared at her, his expression unreadable. "You were planning to betray me, to destroy me." "I was planning to survive," Isabella corrected. "There's a difference." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the city's heartbeat, the sound of chaos and order locked in eternal combat. Then Victor's phone rang. He answered it with a curt greeting, listened for 30 seconds, and his face went pale. "When?" he demanded. "How many?" Another pause. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and looked at Isabella with something approaching fear. "There's been an attack on 3 of my warehouses. Coordinated, professional. They burned them to the ground, killed everyone inside." Victor's voice was hollow. "The Volkovs aren't just targeting you, Isabella. They're targeting the entire family. This is war." Isabella struggled to her feet, her pregnant body suddenly feeling like a cage. "Then we need to—" The lights went out. Not just in the study, throughout the entire estate. Complete darkness. And in that darkness, Isabella heard the sound that changed everything. Gunfire. Victor's hand found Isabella's arm in the darkness, his grip iron hard. "Get down!" he hissed, pulling her behind the heavy oak desk as more gunfire erupted from somewhere on the first floor. The sound was sharp and precise. Not the wild spraying of amateurs, but the controlled bursts of professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing in her ears louder than the gunshots. Her hand instinctively covered her belly, protecting the child who couldn't understand the danger surrounding them. 6 months pregnant and trapped in a house under siege. This was how people died in their world. Sudden, violent, and without ceremony. "How many?" she whispered. Victor had his phone out. The screen's glow illuminating his face in harsh blue light. He was cycling through security camera feeds, but most showed only static. Cameras are down. They cut the power and took out the surveillance system first. Professional breach. His voice was deadly calm, the voice of a man who'd survived a dozen assassination attempts and knew panic was more dangerous than bullets. But I can hear return fire. My men are engaging. Another volley of gunshots, closer this time. Glass shattered somewhere nearby. Footsteps thundered through the hallway outside the study. Victor pulled his gun from the shoulder holster beneath his jacket, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. Stay behind this desk. Don't move unless I tell you to. Understand? Isabella nodded, then realized he couldn't see her in the darkness. Yes. The door to the study exploded inward, wood splintering from the force of a boot. Victor's gun came up instantly, but he didn't fire. The silhouette in the doorway was familiar. Boss, we need to move you now. Tony Marchetti, Victor's head of security, was breathing hard, his suit jacket torn and blood-stained. They breached the east wing, at least 12 hostiles, maybe more. We're outnumbered. How did they get past the perimeter? Victor demanded, already moving toward the door, one hand gripping Isabella's wrist to pull her with him. They had codes, knew exactly where the guards were posted, exactly when the shifts changed. This was an inside job. Tony led them into the hallway, his weapon drawn and sweeping the darkness. We've got a car waiting in the garage. If we move fast, we can... The explosion cut him off. The east wing of the estate erupted in a ball of flame that turned night into day for 3 seconds. The shockwave rattled windows and set off car alarms in the distance. Through the study windows, Isabella could see fire climbing into the sky, hungry and bright. They're burning us out, Victor said flatly. They want us to run, want us exposed. We can't stay here, Tony insisted. The fire will spread, and if they've got the place surrounded, then we're dead either way. Victor's mind was working at combat speed, calculating odds and options. Where's Marie? The staff? We evacuated them through the service entrance 10 minutes ago. Everyone's out except us. Isabella's relief was immediate and overwhelming. Marie was safe. Whatever happened next, at least the innocent woman who'd shown her nothing but kindness would survive. The panic room, Isabella said suddenly. In the wine cellar, my father's design. Both men turned to look at her. Even in the darkness and chaos, she could feel their surprise. What panic room? Victor demanded. I know every inch of this house. There's no... My father built it 20 years ago when he was laundering money for the Castellanos. He didn't trust them not to turn on him, so he created a safe room beneath the wine cellar with its own ventilation, communications equipment, and exit tunnel. Isabella was already moving toward the stairs that led down to the basement. You never knew, because he concealed it before you bought the property. I found the blueprints in his files after he died. Victor grabbed her shoulder, spinning her to face him. And you never told me about this because? Because I needed somewhere you couldn't reach me if things went wrong. Insurance, remember? Isabella pulled free of his grip. But right now, it's the only place in this house they won't expect us to be. We can regroup there, contact your people, figure out who betrayed us. Another explosion, this one in the west wing. The house was being systematically destroyed. They were running out of time. Victor made his decision. Show me. They descended into the basement, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning wood. The wine cellar was a temperature-controlled room lined with racks of bottles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Victor had always been proud of his collection. Now he watched Isabella move past vintage Bordeaux and rare champagne like they were worthless, her hands searching the back wall with practiced familiarity. Here, she said, pressing a specific stone in a specific sequence. A section of the wall swung inward with a soft pneumatic hiss, revealing a steel door behind it. Isabella placed her palm on a biometric scanner that glowed green in the darkness. The door opened. The panic room beyond was compact but well-equipped. Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing communications equipment, a small armory, surveillance monitors, and enough supplies to survive for weeks. It was a fortress within a fortress, built by a man who understood that in their world, paranoia was just good planning. Your father was smarter than I gave him credit for, Victor admitted as Tony sealed the door behind them. The thick steel would withstand anything short of military-grade explosives. He was a survivor, Isabella said quietly. He taught me that the most important skill in this life isn't strength or cunning. It's the ability to think 3 steps ahead of everyone trying to kill you. Tony was already at the communications console, cycling through frequencies. I've got contact with our people outside. They're saying the attack force withdrew after setting the fires. They're gone. Gone? Victor's eyes narrowed. Why would they withdraw? They had us trapped. Isabella felt cold certainty settle in her stomach. Because they weren't trying to kill us. They were sending a message. She moved to the surveillance monitors and began cycling through exterior cameras. The estate was burning, flames consuming 6 years of her life in great billowing clouds of smoke and ash. Fire trucks were arriving, too late to save anything of value. And there, spray-painted across the front gates in letters 10 feet high, was the message the Volkovs wanted the entire underworld to see. Moretti falls tonight. Victor stared at the words. His jaw clenched so tight, Isabella could hear his teeth grinding. They didn't just attack us. They humiliated us, made us look weak in front of everyone. And they're probably broadcasting this to every family in the city, Tony added grimly. By morning, everyone will know the Morettis ran from their own home, that Victor Moretti couldn't protect his own wife. The implications were devastating. In their world, perception was reality. Weakness invited attack. If Victor couldn't defend his own territory, his own home, then every rival would see an opening, every alliance would be questioned, every business arrangement would be renegotiated at gunpoint. The Volkovs weren't just trying to kill Victor. They were trying to destroy his empire by destroying his reputation. Isabella sank into one of the chairs, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Her body ached. The baby was moving constantly now, disturbed by the adrenaline flooding her system. She needed rest, needed safety, needed this nightmare to end. But she knew it was just beginning. We need to strike back, Victor said, pacing the small room like a caged animal. Hit them hard. Show everyone that the Morettis are still a force to be feared. With what resources? Tony challenged. They burned 3 of our warehouses tonight, destroyed the estate. We don't even know how many of our people are dead or compromised. And if they had inside information about our security protocols, then we've got a traitor in the organization. Could be anyone. Then we find the traitor and make an example of them. Victor's voice was cold fury. We find Luna Volkov and make her tell us everything. We find Dmitry Volkov and we end this. Dmitry Volkov is in Moscow, surrounded by his own army, Tony pointed out. We can't touch him there. And Luna could be anywhere by now. We lost her at the docks, remember? Isabella listened to them argue, her mind working through scenarios and possibilities. The Volkovs had played this perfectly. The attack at the gala to damage Victor's reputation, the theft of her insurance files to remove her protection, the assault on the estate to prove the Morettis were vulnerable. And somewhere in all of this, there was a traitor feeding information to the enemy. Someone close to Victor. Someone with access to security protocols, shift schedules, codes. Someone who'd been in position for months, maybe years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It's not one traitor, Isabella said suddenly. Both men turned to look at her. It's several. Luna was the infiltrator, yes, but she needed help. Inside help. Someone who could get her access to my medical records. Someone who could provide security codes. Someone who could coordinate the timing of the attacks. Victor's expression darkened. You're saying I've got multiple traitors in my organization. I'm saying the Volkovs have been planning this for a long time. Luna was just the visible piece. There are others still embedded, still feeding them information. Isabella stood slowly, one hand supporting her lower back. We need to think like they do. What's their endgame? It's not just killing you, Victor. If they wanted you dead, you'd be dead already. They want something else. They want the empire, Tony said quietly. The territory. The businesses. They want to destroy Victor's reputation so thoroughly that when they move in to take over, there's no resistance, no loyalty, just fear and opportunism. Isabella nodded. Which means their next move will be against your allies. They'll approach the other families with an offer, join us or go down with the Morettis. They'll make it seem inevitable, make resistance seem futile. Then we get to the families first, Victor decided. We call an emergency meeting of the commission, Get everyone in a room and expose the Volkov's plan before they can fracture our alliances. The commission won't meet on your say-so, Tony objected. Not after tonight. They'll see you as damaged goods, toxic. Then I make them meet. I call in every favor, every debt, every obligation. Victor's eyes were hard as diamonds. And I bring proof, evidence that the Volkovs are coming for all of us, not just the Morettis, that tonight was the opening salvo in a larger war. What proof? Isabella asked quietly. The Volkovs stole my files, remember? All my evidence, all my documentation. It's gone. Victor smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. Not all of it. You said your father taught you to think 3 steps ahead. Did you really keep all your insurance in one location? Isabella met his eyes and slowly smiled back. No, I kept copies, multiple copies in multiple locations, safety deposit boxes, cloud storage under false names, physical files with trusted associates who don't even know what they're holding. She touched her belly. I learned from my father's mistakes. He kept everything in one place, made himself a single point of failure. I didn't. Can you access these copies? Some of them. The digital ones, yes. The physical files will take time, but I can retrieve them. Victor moved to the communications console. Tony, I need you to contact everyone on the commission. Tell them there's an emergency meeting tomorrow night at the Castellano estate. Neutral ground, non-negotiable. They won't come, Tony warned. They will if they think I'm going to confess to crimes that implicate them too. Tell them I'm making a deal with the FBI. Tell them I'm flipping on everyone to save myself. Tell them whatever you need to tell them, but get them in that room. Tony nodded and began making calls, his voice low and urgent. Isabella watched Victor pace, watched him plan and scheme and fight back against the forces trying to destroy him, and she felt something unexpected, admiration. For 6 years, she'd seen Victor as an obstacle to be managed, a danger to be controlled. But watching him now, seeing him refuse to surrender even when every rational calculation said he should, she understood why this man had built an empire. He was relentless, unbreakable, a force of nature wrapped in expensive suits and lethal charisma. What are you thinking? Victor asked, catching her watching him. That you're going to get us both killed, Isabella said honestly, but that you might just pull this off anyway. He moved closer, his hand finding hers in the dim light. I won't let anything happen to you or the baby. Whatever else I am, whatever mistakes I've made, I protect what's mine. I'm not yours, Isabella said quietly. I never was. That was always the problem, Victor. You treated me like property instead of a partner, like something to be possessed instead of someone to be trusted. And you've been planning to betray me since the day we married. I've been planning to survive since the day we married. There's a difference. They stood there in the aftermath of their burning home, their hands joined, their empire collapsing around them. And for the first time in 6 years, they were truly seeing each other. If we survive this, Victor said slowly, things are going to change between us. I can't have a wife I don't trust, and you can't have a husband you're constantly planning to destroy. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we become what you said we should have been all along, partners. Not master and servant, not owner and possession. Partners who trust each other because we choose to, not because we're trapped together. Isabella studied his face, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the angle. But she saw only exhaustion and a strange kind of honesty born from crisis. And if I can't trust you, she asked, if I can't give you that, then we get through this crisis together. And when it's over, I give you the divorce you wanted. Clean, final. You and the baby taken care of, no strings attached. Victor's thumb traced circles on her palm. But I think you can trust me, Isabella. I think we've both been playing roles for so long that we forgot we could choose to be real with each other. Before Isabella could respond, Tony ended his last call and turned to face them. It's done. The commission meets tomorrow night at 8. Everyone except the Castellanos thinks you're turning state's evidence. Antonio knows the truth, and he's agreed to host because he's terrified the Volkovs will come for him next. Good. Victor released Isabella's hand and moved to the weapons locker. Now we need to survive the next 24 hours. The Volkovs know we escaped the fire. They'll be looking for us. We can't go to any of my properties. They're all compromised. Can't trust hotels or safe houses. We don't know who's been paid off. I have a place, Isabella said. Both men looked at her in surprise. A small apartment in Queens. I bought it 2 years ago under a shell company, paid cash, never visited more than once a month. It's clean, untraceable. We can hide there until the meeting. Victor shook his head in amazement. Is there anything you haven't planned for? I didn't plan for this, Isabella admitted, gesturing to her pregnant belly. This was supposed to happen after I'd secured my position, after I had all the leverage I needed. But the baby came early, and now... She trailed off, one hand on her stomach, as the child kicked again, harder this time. Now I'm vulnerable in ways I never wanted to be. The baby makes you stronger, not weaker, Victor said. It gives you something to fight for beyond yourself, beyond survival. Isabella wanted to argue, to explain that in their world children were liabilities, hostages waiting to happen, vulnerabilities to be exploited. But the conviction in Victor's voice stopped her. Maybe he was right. Maybe the baby wasn't a weakness. Maybe it was the thing that would force both of them to be better than they'd been, to build something worth protecting instead of just defending territory. They left the panic room through the escape tunnel Isabella's father had built, emerging 3 blocks away in the basement of an abandoned warehouse. The night air was thick with smoke and ash, the distant sound of sirens creating an eerie soundtrack to their escape. Tony had a car waiting, an anonymous sedan that wouldn't attract attention. The drive to Queens took an hour through late-night traffic. Isabella directed them to a neighborhood of modest apartment buildings and corner markets, nowhere a powerful mafia boss would ever think to look. The apartment itself was on the 3rd floor of a 5-story walk-up, furnished with cheap but functional furniture from discount stores. "Home sweet home," Isabella said dryly as they entered. "It's not the estate, but it has the advantage of not being on fire." Victor moved through the space, checking windows, examining sight lines, his tactical mind never resting. Tony took up position by the door, his weapon ready, and Isabella sank onto the worn couch with a sigh of relief, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the exhaustion dragging at her bones. "You should rest," Victor said. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult." "Tomorrow's going to be impossible," Isabella corrected. "We're going to walk into a room full of people who want us dead and try to convince them to help us. The Volkovs have spent months building their position. We have hours." "Then we'd better make them count." Victor sat beside her on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Tell me about the evidence you have. What can we prove?" Isabella's mind shifted into tactical mode, cataloging assets and possibilities. "I have financial records showing the Volkovs have been buying influence with smaller families for the past year. Payments to low-level soldiers, bribes to politicians and cops. I have communications between Luna and her uncle discussing the infiltration plan. And I have something else." "What?" "Proof that the Volkovs were behind the murder of Carlo Benedetti last year." Victor went very still. Carlo Benedetti had been the head of one of the Commission's most powerful families. His death in a car accident had been investigated thoroughly and ruled accidental. But there had always been whispers, suspicions. "If you can prove the Volkovs killed Carlo," Victor said slowly, "then you can prove they've already been at war with the Commission, that they're a threat to everyone, not just us. That changes everything." "I can prove it. I have the mechanic's testimony, the man they paid to tamper with Carlo's brakes. He's been in witness protection under a false name, but I know where he is. I've been paying him to stay alive and keep his mouth shut." Isabella smiled grimly. "Insurance, remember? You've been preparing for this war longer than I realized. I've been preparing for every possible war since the day I understood what my father really did for a living. This world doesn't tolerate the unprepared, Victor. It eats them alive." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the next day's confrontation settling over them like a shroud. Outside, the city continued its restless motion, millions of people living their lives with no idea that the criminal underworld was tearing itself apart. "I need to ask you something," Victor said finally, "and I need the truth." "What?" "When you came to me with those papers that night, when you asked me to sign them, were you planning to leave me or were you planning to trap me?" Isabella considered lying, considered giving him the answer that would make things easier. But she was tired of lies, Tired of games, tired of being someone she wasn't. Both, she said honestly. I was giving you a choice, even if you didn't realize it. If you'd treated me with respect, if you'd actually read what you were signing and asked me about it like a partner, instead of dismissing me like a servant, then maybe things could have been different. But you didn't. You signed without reading because you were so certain I was beneath your notice. And the trap? The trap was real. I wasn't bluffing about the asset transfers. I took what I needed to protect our child and myself. Whether that was betrayal or self-preservation depends on your perspective. Victor was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. My father once told me that the difference between a good boss and a great one is knowing when you've been outplayed. Good bosses fight reality until it destroys them. Great bosses adapt. Which one are you? I'm still figuring that out. He turned to look at her, really look at her, in the dim light of the cheap apartment. But I know this. I underestimated you. Treated you like an ornament when you were a weapon. That was my mistake. One I won't make again. Is that an apology? It's an acknowledgement. Whether that becomes an apology depends on whether we survive the next 48 hours. Isabella laughed despite everything, despite the fear and exhaustion and danger, because there was something darkly funny about sitting in a queen's apartment with her mafia husband, their home burned to the ground, their lives in danger, discussing relationship dynamics. Get some rest, Victor said again. I'll keep watch with Tony. We'll figure out the details of tomorrow's presentation in the morning. But Isabella shook her head. No, we figure it out now, because the Volkovs won't be resting. They'll be preparing their own presentation, their own narrative, and whoever tells the better story tomorrow night wins. It's that simple. So they worked through the night, two people who'd spent 6 years as strangers finally learning to speak the same language. Isabella outlined the evidence she had access to, the witnesses she could produce, the financial trails she could expose. Victor contributed his own knowledge of commission politics, of who could be swayed and who was already lost, of what arguments would resonate and what would fall flat. By the time dawnlight filtered through the cheap blinds, they had a strategy, risky, audacious, dependent on a dozen factors going exactly right. But it was something, and in their world, something was better than nothing. You should eat, Victor said as the morning sun climbed higher. You haven't had anything since before the gala. Isabella realized he was right. Her stomach was hollow, and the baby was making its displeasure known with sharp kicks. There's not much here. Some crackers. Canned soup. I'll send Tony out for food. Something substantial. You need your strength. The concern in his voice was unfamiliar. Strange. Victor had provided for her materially throughout their marriage. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, a luxurious home, but he'd never before concerned himself with whether she'd eaten or rested. Those were details beneath his notice. Things were changing between them. The crisis was burning away pretense, leaving only what was real. Tony returned an hour later with breakfast sandwiches and coffee. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Isabella found herself studying the two men who would stand beside her when she faced the commission. Tony, loyal to Victor for 15 years, who'd taken a bullet for him in Detroit and never asked for anything in return, and Victor himself, complex and dangerous and finally seeing her as something more than decoration. It's almost time, Tony said, checking his watch. If we're going to get your witness from protection, we need to move soon. The meeting's at 8. That gives us 12 hours to gather everything and get to the Castellano estate. Isabella nodded and stood, her body protesting the movement. 6 months pregnant and running on no sleep after the most harrowing night of her life. She should be terrified, should be broken. Instead, she felt focused, clear, ready, because tonight the invisible wife was going to become very visible indeed, and the underworld was going to learn that Isabella Moretti was no one's victim. She was the queen who'd been playing a long game, and the endgame was about to begin. The witness lived in a small house in suburban New Jersey under the name Robert Chen, though Isabella knew him as Giuseppe Moreno, the mechanic who'd sabotaged Carlo Benedetti's car 18 months ago. She'd found him through her father's network, that invisible web of informants and assets that Marco Russo had spent 15 years cultivating. Giuseppe had been paid $50,000 by a Volkov intermediary to cut the brake lines just enough that they'd fail at highway speed. The job had been professional, untraceable, perfect. Except Giuseppe had kept the down payment envelope with the Volkov family crest embossed on it. Insurance, he'd called it. Proof that he was just following orders if anyone ever came asking questions. Isabella had been asking questions for over a year. She'd tracked Giuseppe through 3 name changes and 2 states before finding him working at a tire shop in Newark. She'd paid him $10,000 for his silence and his testimony when the time came. That time was now. Tony drove while Victor sat in the back seat with Isabella, his phone pressed to his ear as he made call after call to his remaining loyal soldiers. The organization was fracturing. Some men weren't answering. Others were hedging, asking careful questions about who was winning before they committed to either side. A few had already defected to the Volkovs, their betrayal confirmed by intelligence Tony's contacts had gathered overnight. "We're losing people by the hour," Victor said grimly after ending another call. "The Volkovs are offering better terms, protection, territory. They're painting me as a sinking ship and themselves as the future." "Then we change the narrative tonight," Isabella said. She was exhausted, her body aching from too much stress and too little rest, but her mind was sharp, focused. "We make them understand that the Volkovs aren't offering partnership. They're offering subjugation, and we have proof." The tire shop was a squat cinder block building wedged between a bodega and a laundromat. Tony parked across the street, his eyes scanning for threats, for surveillance, for any indication that the Volkovs had anticipated this move. But the street was quiet, just another working-class neighborhood where people minded their business and didn't ask questions. "Stay in the car," Victor told Isabella. "Tony and I will get him." "No." Isabella was already opening her door. "Giuseppe knows me, trusts me. If you two walk in there looking like you do, he'll run. Let me talk to him first." Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. 5 minutes. Then we come in regardless." Isabella crossed the street slowly, one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting on her belly. The baby was quieter now, conserving energy perhaps, or simply responding to her mother's forced calm. Through the tire shop's grimy windows, she could see Giuseppe bent over an engine, his hands black with grease, his face lined with the kind of exhaustion that came from running and never feeling safe. A bell chimed when she pushed open the door. Giuseppe looked up, and his face went white as paper. "Mrs. Moretti," he breathed, straightening. His hands fumbled for a rag, wiping uselessly at the grease. "You shouldn't be here. If anyone sees—" "We need to talk, Giuseppe. Somewhere private." Isabella glanced toward the small office at the back of the shop. "Now." He hesitated, his eyes darting to the street outside, clearly calculating his chances of running. But Isabella had chosen him for a reason. Giuseppe Moreno was many things: a killer, a traitor to his former employers, a man living on borrowed time. But he wasn't stupid. He knew that if Isabella Moretti had found him, running was pointless. He led her to the office and closed the door. The space was cramped and cluttered with paperwork, the air thick with the smell of motor oil and fear. "I kept my mouth shut like you paid me to," Giuseppe said quickly. "Haven't talked to anyone. Haven't—" "I know, and I'm grateful." Isabella lowered herself carefully into the room's only chair. "But the situation has changed. The Volkovs have moved against my husband openly. There's going to be a reckoning tonight, and I need you there to testify about what they paid you to do to Carlo Benedetti." Giuseppe's face crumpled. "No, no way. You said I'd never have to go public. You said the information was just insurance." "It was, but now I need to cash in that insurance. The Volkovs are trying to take over the commission. If they succeed, do you think they'll let you live? You're a loose end, Giuseppe, a witness who can tie them to murder. They'll eliminate you the moment they have the power to do it safely. And if I testify against them, they'll kill me anyway. Faster, probably. More painfully." Isabella leaned forward, her voice dropping to the low, intense tone she'd learned from watching Victor negotiate. "If you testify, you'll have the protection of every family on the commission. You'll have witness protection from the federal government if you want it. You'll have a future instead of just borrowed time." She paused, letting that sink in. "And I'll pay you another $100,000. Cash. Untraceable. Giuseppe's eyes widened. You're serious? Completely. But I need your answer now. My husband is across the street with armed men. I can either walk out of here with you as a cooperative witness, or you can refuse and take your chances with the Volkovs finding you on their own. Isabella's smile was cold. And they will find you, Giuseppe. They're very thorough about eliminating loose ends. The mechanic slumped against the desk, defeat written across his features. He was trapped, and he knew it. Trapped by his own greed 18 months ago when he'd accepted blood money. Trapped now by the consequences of that choice. What do I have to do? He asked quietly. Tell the truth. Show them the evidence. Convince them that the Volkovs are a threat to everyone, not just the Morettis. Isabella stood slowly. And stay alive long enough for this to matter. 10 minutes later, they were back in the car with Giuseppe squeezed between Tony and a cooler full of evidence documents. The mechanic looked like he was going to be sick, his face gray and sweaty. Isabella felt a distant pang of sympathy. She dragged this man into the spotlight, turned him from a hidden chess piece into a visible player on the board. If things went wrong tonight, he'd be the first casualty. But she couldn't afford sympathy, not now, not when everything was balanced on a knife's edge. They spent the rest of the day in the Queen's apartment preparing. Isabella reviewed her evidence files until she could recite them from memory. Victor coordinated with his remaining loyal soldiers, building a security perimeter around the Castellano estate that would make assassination difficult, if not impossible. Tony drilled Giuseppe on his testimony, making sure the nervous mechanic wouldn't freeze or contradict himself under pressure. By 7 o'clock, Isabella's body was screaming for rest. Her feet were swollen. Her back ached. The baby was kicking constantly, disturbed by the stress hormones flooding her system. She needed to lie down, needed to sleep, needed to not be 6 months pregnant in the middle of a mafia war. But she was all of those things, so she pushed the discomfort aside and focused on the immediate task. Survival first, comfort later. If there was a later. You should change, Victor said, gesturing to the garment bag he'd had Tony retrieve from one of his untouched properties. The commission needs to see strength tonight. Power. Isabella unzipped the bag and found a dress inside. Black silk, elegantly cut to accommodate her pregnancy, paired with jewelry that managed to be both understated and unmistakably expensive. Victor had chosen well. The outfit struck exactly the right balance between respectability and danger. She changed in the apartment's tiny bathroom, studying herself in the mirror. 6 years ago, she'd been a frightened girl playing dress-up in a world that would destroy her if she showed weakness. Now she was something else. Someone else. A woman who'd mapped an empire, survived assassination attempts, and was about to walk into a room full of killers to save her family. The transformation was complete. Isabella Russo had become Isabella Moretti, and Isabella Moretti was no one's victim. When she emerged, Victor was waiting in a fresh suit, looking every inch the powerful crime boss, despite the fact that his empire was crumbling around him. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded approval. "You look like a queen," he said. "I feel like someone about to be executed." "Same thing in our world." Victor offered his arm. "Shall we?" The drive to the Castellano estate was tense and silent. Giuseppe sat in the back, clutching his envelope of evidence like a talisman. Tony drove with the focused intensity of a man expecting ambush at any moment. And Isabella breathed through the contractions that had started an hour ago. Not real labor, just Braxton Hicks, her body's way of preparing for the eventual birth. But they were uncomfortable and distracting, each one a reminder that she was vulnerable in ways that could be exploited. "Are you all right?" Victor asked quietly, noticing her wince. "Fine. Just practice contractions. Normal for this stage." "Isabella, if you need to go to a hospital, I need to finish this." She cut him off firmly. "The baby's not coming tonight. We have time." They arrived at the Castellano estate at 7:45, 15 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. The circular drive was already crowded with luxury cars. Mercedes, Bentleys, Maseratis, each one representing a family, a power base, a potential ally or enemy. Victor's security team had established checkpoints at every entrance, searching everyone who entered for weapons, for wires, for any threat. Antonio Castellano himself met them at the door, his expression grave. "Victor, Isabella, I'm glad you made it safely." "Are they all here?" Victor asked without preamble. "Everyone except the Russos and the DeLucas. They sent word that they're standing with the Volkovs openly now." Antonio's voice dropped. "And I should tell you, the Volkovs have sent a representative, Luna. She's claiming diplomatic immunity, saying she's just here to present their side of things." Victor's face darkened. "You let that woman into your house after what she tried to do?" "I let her in because refusing would have made me look like I'm choosing sides before hearing the evidence. This is supposed to be a neutral forum, Victor. I can't bar people without cause." Antonio gestured toward the library. "But I've had her searched thoroughly. She's unarmed, and my men are watching her every second." Isabella felt cold certainty settle in her chest. Luna being here was a complication. The Russian woman was smart, charismatic, and had spent months building relationships with various family members. She'd be a formidable opponent in any argument. "Let's get this over with," Victor said grimly. The library was a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books that no one had read in decades. A massive oak table dominated the center, and around it sat the heads of the 9 families that made up the commission. Isabella recognized them all. Men she'd served drinks to at parties, smiled at during charity events, treated like her betters while mapping their weaknesses. Now she was going to stand before them as an equal, as someone with power. The conversations died as Victor entered. Every eye turned to assess, to judge, to calculate. Isabella could feel their gazes sliding over her, dismissing her as they always had, focusing on Victor as the only person who mattered. That was going to change very soon. "Gentlemen," Victor said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd built an empire through force of will. "Thank you for coming on short notice. I know there have been rumors, accusations, questions about my stability, my reliability, my future." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "Tonight, I'm going to answer those questions. And I'm going to show you that the real threat isn't the Moretti family, it's the Volkovs." "Bold words from a man whose house burned down last night," said Michael Caruso, head of the Caruso family and Victor's oldest rival, "whose warehouses were destroyed, whose organization is hemorrhaging soldiers by the hour. Attacks that were orchestrated by the Volkovs as part of a systematic campaign to destabilize my family and take my territory," Victor shot back. "But I have proof. Evidence that shows the Volkovs have been at war with all of us for over a year, that they murdered one of our own and made it look like an accident." That got their attention. Conversations erupted around the table. Antonio called for order, banging a gavel that seemed absurd in its formality, given the context. "Those are serious accusations," Antonio said when the room quieted. "Do you have proof to back them up?" "I do." Victor gestured to Isabella. "My wife has been investigating the Volkovs for months. She has financial records, communication intercepts, witness testimony. Everything you need to understand the scope of their operation." Isabella stepped forward, acutely aware of every eye on her now, not dismissive anymore. Curious, skeptical, waiting to see if the quiet wife had anything of substance to say. She opened her folder and pulled out the first document. 18 months ago, Carlo Benedetti died in what was ruled a mechanical failure. His car's brakes failed at highway speed. Investigation found nothing suspicious. She slid the document across the table. "This is a payment record showing $50,000 transferred from a Volkov shell company to a mechanic named Giuseppe Moreno 2 days before Carlo's death." The men passed the document around, studying it carefully. "Could be coincidence," Michael said. "Could be for legitimate work." "It could be," Isabella agreed. "Except Giuseppe Moreno is here tonight, and he's prepared to testify that he was paid specifically to sabotage Carlo's brakes, that he was given explicit instructions on how to make it look like mechanical failure, that he kept the payment envelope as insurance." Tony brought Giuseppe forward. The mechanic looked terrified, his hands shaking as he clutched his envelope. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I cut the brake lines on Mr. Benedetti's car. I was paid by a man who worked for Dmitry Volkov. He told me it had to look natural, had to be untraceable. I did the job, took the money, and thought that was the end of it." Giuseppe's eyes swept the room. "But Mrs. Moretti found me, paid me to keep quiet and keep the evidence. I've been sitting on this for 18 months, waiting for it to matter. I guess it matters now. He placed the envelope on the table. Antonio opened it carefully, pulling out a cream-colored envelope with the Volkov family crest embossed in gold. Inside was a note with payment details and instructions, all in Russian. The room exploded in angry conversation. Carlo Benedetti had been respected, his death mourned. If the Volkovs had killed him, had gotten away with it, had been operating within the Commission's territory with impunity, this proves nothing, a voice cut through the chaos. Luna stood in the doorway, elegant and composed despite being in a room full of men who had reason to want her dead. A mechanic's testimony? Payment records that could be fabricated? You'll need more than that to convince anyone. Then let's talk about you, Isabella said calmly. She pulled out another document. Your real name is Svetlana Volkov. You stole the identity of a dead woman and infiltrated my husband's life with the explicit goal of destroying him. I have communications between you and your uncle discussing strategy, timeline, and methodology. Luna's smile didn't waver. More fabricated evidence. Ich bohr us, Mrs. Moretti is desperate to save her failing marriage and her husband's dying empire. She'll say anything, produce anything, to make herself seem valuable. Is that why you fled the gala last night? Isabella challenged. Why you ran the moment I exposed your identity? Innocent people don't run. I ran because I was being threatened by armed men in a hostile environment. Self-preservation, not guilt. Luna turned to address the commission directly. Gentlemen, I'm here tonight representing the Volkov family's interests. We're prepared to make a very generous offer. Territory, trade routes, protection. All we ask is that you recognize reality. The Moretti family is finished. Victor's made too many enemies, too many mistakes. Aligning with him now is suicide. Aligning with us is the future. Several of the family heads nodded thoughtfully. Isabella felt the room slipping away, felt Luna's charisma and confidence winning hearts and minds despite the evidence. She needed something bigger, something undeniable. Show them the medical report, Victor said quietly. Isabella hesitated. This was the card she'd been holding back, the proof that would destroy any remaining credibility Luna had, but would also expose her own vulnerability. Once the commission knew about the poisoning attempt, they'd know she'd been targeted, been considered weak enough to attack. But there was no choice. Not anymore. She pulled out the toxicology report from the private lab she'd used to test Victor's vitamins, the ones Luna had been slowly lacing with poison. The document showed lethal levels of arsenic in the pills, enough to kill within weeks if administered consistently. Luna had access to my husband's private bathroom, Isabella explained, sliding the report across the table. She was slowly poisoning him, making him sick enough to seem weak, unstable, prone to mistakes. The plan was for him to die of apparent natural causes: stress, overwork, perhaps a heart attack. No investigation, no questions, just convenient timing for the Volkovs to step into the power vacuum. The family heads studied the report with new intensity. This was different from financial records or testimony. This was attempted murder of one of their own, an attack on the commission itself. Luna's composure finally cracked. That's a lie. I never had access to— You had access to everything, Victor interrupted, his voice cold fury. I gave you keys, codes, trusted you because I was too arrogant to see what was right in front of me. But my wife saw. She's been watching you for months, documenting everything. And she saved my life by swapping the poisoned vitamins for placebos before they could kill me. He turned to the commission. The Volkovs aren't offering partnership. They're offering subjugation. They kill those who won't bend. They infiltrate. They poison. They lie. And if you accept their terms tonight, you'll be next. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next year. But eventually, they'll decide you're an obstacle and you'll end up like Carlo Benedetti, dead in a way that looks natural. The silence that followed was absolute. Isabella could see the calculations happening behind every set of eyes, reassessing, reconsidering, weighing evidence against opportunity. Michael Caruso spoke first, his voice thoughtful. These are serious accusations. If true, the Volkovs have committed acts of war against the Commission that can't be ignored or forgiven. They're not true, Luna insisted, but her voice lacked conviction now. She was trapped and she knew it. This is a conspiracy, a desperate attempt by the Morettis to— The gunshot cut her off. Luna's chest exploded in red. She looked down at the spreading stain, her expression more surprised than pained. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed to the floor, blood pooling beneath her. Everyone turned to see who'd fired. Tony stood in the doorway, his weapon still raised, his face grim. "She reached for something," he said flatly. "Thought it was a weapon. I neutralized the threat." Antonio's men rushed to check Luna's body. They found a small syringe in her pocket, empty but clearly designed for injecting something quickly. Poison probably, or a toxin that would have killed whoever she'd managed to stick. "She came here to kill someone," Antonio said slowly, holding up the syringe. "Probably Victor. Probably to finish what the poison started when he survived the fire." The mood in the room shifted decisively. Whatever doubts had existed about Isabella's evidence evaporated in the face of Luna's attempted assassination. She'd proven herself a threat through her own actions. "The question now," Michael said, looking at Victor with new respect, "is what we do about the Volkovs. They've declared war on the Commission, whether we acknowledged it or not. That demands a response." "A unified response," Antonio agreed. "If we fracture now, they'll pick us off one by one. But if we stand together, show them that attacking one of us means attacking all of us." The conversation turned to strategy, to alliances, to the logistics of warfare. Isabella listened with half her attention, the other half focused on the body bleeding out on Antonio's expensive carpet. Luna Volkov had been beautiful, intelligent, dangerous, and now she was just meat cooling on the floor. This was Isabella's world now. Not the world of charity galas and polite conversation, but the world of blood and consequence. The world where mistakes were fatal and weakness was death. She'd chosen this path when she'd decided to fight instead of surrender. Chosen it when she'd mapped Victor's empire instead of accepting her role as ornamental wife. And now she had to live with the reality of that choice. Victor's hand found hers under the table, his grip warm and solid. "You did well," he murmured. "You saved us." Isabella looked at him, this man she'd married out of necessity and learned to understand through crisis. "We saved each other. That's what partners do." The Commission voted unanimously to stand against the Volkovs, to pool resources, to coordinate responses, to send a message that the families might fight among themselves, but they'd unite against outside threats. It was a victory, a significant one. But Isabella knew it wasn't over. The Volkovs still had resources, still had allies, still had Dmitri himself, alive and plotting in Moscow despite her bluff to Luna. The war was just beginning. And as another contraction rippled through her belly, Isabella realized with cold certainty that she might not survive to see the end of it. The contractions were getting worse. Isabella had been timing them discreetly throughout the Commission meeting, and what had started as mild discomfort was evolving into something that demanded attention. 10 minutes apart, then 8, now 6. Her water hadn't broken, which meant she still had time, but not much. She said nothing as Victor coordinated the unified response against the Volkovs. Said nothing as the family heads pledged soldiers and resources to the coming conflict. Said nothing as Antonio's staff cleaned Luna's body from the carpet, and the men pretended death was just another item of business to be managed. But when another contraction hit, harder than the others, she couldn't suppress the small gasp that escaped her lips. Victor's head snapped toward her immediately. "Isabella?" "I'm fine," she managed, but even she could hear the strain in her voice. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Michael Caruso was watching her with sharp eyes. "Mrs. Moretti, you look pale. Perhaps you should see a doctor." "I said I'm fine," Isabella repeated, more firmly this time. She would not show weakness in front of these men, would not give them reason to doubt her strength or Victor's judgment in trusting her. "We have more important things to discuss than my comfort." But Victor wasn't convinced. He'd learned to read her over the past 48 hours, had started paying attention to the small signs he'd ignored for 6 years. He stood abruptly. "Gentlemen, I think we've covered the essential points. The Volkovs will expect retaliation after Luna's death. We should move quickly, strike before they can prepare defenses. Antonio, can your people have logistics worked out by morning?" "Easily." Antonio was still watching Isabella with concern. "But Victor, if your wife needs medical attention..." "She'll get it. Tony, bring the car around. We're leaving." The drive back to the Queen's apartment should have taken 40 minutes. They made it in 25, with Tony running red lights and weaving through traffic, while Victor held Isabella's hand in the back seat. The contractions were 4 minutes apart now, each one a vice grip around her midsection that left her breathless. "We should go to a hospital," Victor said for the third time. "No hospitals. They'll find us there. The Volkovs will hear that I'm vulnerable and they'll strike." Isabella breathed through another contraction, counting seconds until it passed. "I have a doctor, someone my father used. Discreet, off the books. Call Marie. She has the number." Victor made the call while Tony drove like the devil himself was chasing them. The doctor, an elderly woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd been delivering babies for criminal families for 40 years, agreed to meet them at the apartment within the hour. She asked no questions, quoted no prices, simply confirmed the address and disconnected. They were climbing the stairs to the third floor when Isabella's water broke. The rush of fluid was sudden and unmistakable, soaking through her dress and pooling on the worn carpet. She stopped mid-step, one hand gripping the railing, the other pressed to her belly. "That's not supposed to happen yet," she said, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she sounded truly frightened. "I'm only 6 months. The baby's not ready. It's too early." "We're getting you inside and we're getting you help," Victor said firmly. He lifted her into his arms despite her pregnancy weight, carrying her the rest of the way up the stairs like she weighed nothing. Tony ran ahead to open the apartment door. They had barely gotten Isabella onto the bed when Dr. Chen arrived, a small Asian woman in her 70s with steady hands and calm eyes that had seen every complication imaginable. She examined Isabella with efficient professionalism while Victor paced the small bedroom like a caged animal. "How bad is it?" he demanded. "Can you stop the labor? The baby's too early. We need to—" "Mr. Moretti, I need you to step outside," Dr. Chen said without looking up from her examination. "You're making your wife more anxious, which is making the situation worse." "I'm not leaving her." "Victor, go," Isabella managed between contractions. "Let her work. I'll be fine." He looked like he wanted to argue, but Tony appeared in the doorway and physically pulled him out of the room. "Boss, she knows what she's doing. Let her do it." Dr. Chen worked in silence for several minutes, checking vitals, measuring dilation, assessing the baby's position. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured and professional. "You're in active labor. The baby's coming whether we want it to or not. Given the circumstances, the stress, the trauma of the past 2 days, this isn't entirely surprising. Your body's been flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. That can trigger premature labor." "Can you stop it?" Isabella asked desperately. "No. And I wouldn't recommend trying even if I could. You're already 5 centimeters dilated. The baby's heart rate is good, position is good. Your body knows what it's doing, Isabella. We just need to help it along safely." "But 6 months, that's too early. The baby's lungs aren't developed. The survival rate—" "You're closer to 7 months than 6, Dr. Chen corrected gently. "I'd estimate you're at about 28 weeks. That's premature, yes, but viable. We'll manage the birth here, and then we'll need to get the baby to a NICU as quickly as possible. I have contacts at 3 different hospitals. We'll find one that's secure." Another contraction hit, harder than any before. Isabella screamed despite her best efforts to stay quiet. The pain was overwhelming, a tidal wave that drowned everything else. Dr. Chen called for Victor. He burst back into the room, his face white with fear. "What's happening? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. This is normal labor progression. But I need your help." Dr. Chen positioned him beside the bed. "Hold her hand. Talk to her. Keep her focused and breathing. Can you do that?" Victor nodded mutely, taking Isabella's hand in both of his. Her grip was crushing, nails digging into his skin hard enough to draw blood, but he didn't flinch. "I'm here," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere. You're going to get through this, Bella. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You can do this." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort. Dr. Chen coached Isabella through each contraction, each push, each moment when her body demanded more than she thought she could give. Victor stayed beside her the entire time, his presence a constant anchor in the chaos. At some point, Tony appeared with towels and water. At another point, Marie arrived, summoned by some instinct or phone call Isabella hadn't been aware of, and the older woman's face was wet with tears as she held Isabella's other hand. "You're doing beautifully," Marie whispered. "Just a little more. Just a little further." Isabella wanted to scream that she couldn't do more, couldn't go further, that her body was breaking apart and taking her sanity with it. But she'd never surrendered to anything in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. So she pushed through pain that felt like dying, pushed through exhaustion that made her vision swim, pushed through every instinct that screamed for her to stop. And finally, after what felt like a lifetime compressed into 4 hours, she heard it, a cry, thin and weak, but unmistakably alive. "It's a girl," Dr. Chen announced, holding up a tiny red-faced creature that couldn't have weighed more than 3 pounds. "She's small, but she's breathing on her own. That's excellent." Isabella collapsed against the pillows, her body trembling with exhaustion and relief and fear. A daughter. She had a daughter. Victor's daughter. A tiny, fragile life that had arrived too early into a world at war. Dr. Chen worked quickly, clamping and cutting the umbilical cord, clearing the baby's airways, checking reflexes and responses. "She needs a NICU immediately. The next few hours are critical. Tony, I need you to call this number." She rattled off digits from memory. "Tell them Dr. Chen is sending an emergency premature infant. They'll have everything ready." Victor was staring at the baby with an expression Isabella had never seen before. Wonder, terror, something that might have been love struggling to take shape in a heart that had been hardened by decades of violence. "Can I hold her?" he asked quietly. "Briefly. She needs medical attention, but—" "Doctor." Chen placed the baby carefully in Victor's arms, showing him how to support the tiny head. "Meet your daughter, Mr. Moretti." Victor looked down at the infant, this impossibly small creature that was his blood, his legacy, his future. And Isabella watched something fundamental shift in his expression. All the calculation, all the strategic thinking, all the careful control, it shattered against the reality of holding his child. "She's so small," he breathed, "so fragile." "She's a fighter," Isabella said weakly. "Like her father, like her mother, she'll survive." The baby was whisked away within minutes, wrapped in blankets and placed in a portable incubator that Tony had somehow procured. Dr. Chen went with her, promising to call the moment they reached the hospital. And then Isabella and Victor were alone in the small apartment bedroom, the sheets stained with blood and fluid, the air still thick with the smell of birth. "You need to rest," Victor said, but he made no move to leave her side. "You've lost blood. You need—" "I need to know we're safe," Isabella interrupted. "The baby's safe. That the Volkovs can't reach her in the hospital. I've already got people moving into position. The hospital will be locked down tighter than a federal prison. No one gets near our daughter without going through a dozen armed guards." Victor's hand found hers again, gentler this time. "She's safe, Isabella. I promise you that." Isabella wanted to believe him, wanted to surrender to the exhaustion pulling at her consciousness. But she'd spent too long trusting no one, protecting herself, always watching for the knife at her back. "What happens now?" she asked. "With the Volkovs? With the commission? With us?" "Now we finish what we started," Victor said grimly. "The commission is unified. The Volkovs are exposed, and they're going to pay for everything they've done, for Carlo, for the attacks, for putting you and our daughter at risk. And then what? We go back to the way things were? You running your empire while I play the invisible wife?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested real thought, real consideration. "No, we can't go back. Too much has changed. You've changed. I've changed. What we had before, that wasn't a marriage. It was a business arrangement at best, a prison at worst. So what are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we start over. Actually start over, not just rearrange the same broken pieces." He looked at her directly, his dark eyes holding hers. "I'm proposing we become the partners you said we should have been from the beginning. Equal partners. Not master and servant, not owner and property. Two people building something together because we choose to, not because we're trapped." Isabella studied his face, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the angle. But exhaustion had stripped away Victor's masks too. What she saw was just a man, flawed and dangerous, yes, but also capable of growth, capable of change. "I'll need proof," she said finally. "Not promises, proof. Real partnership means real power, real decision-making authority, real respect. Then I'll prove it. Starting tomorrow, you'll have access to everything. Financial records, strategic planning, personnel decisions. You want to be a partner? Fine. Be a partner. Show me what that strategic mind of yours can do when it's working with me instead of against me. It was more than Isabella had expected. More than she'd dared hope for when she'd first confronted Victor with those papers weeks ago. But the cynic in her, the part that had been shaped by her father's paranoia and 6 years of invisible survival, wasn't ready to fully believe. "And if I decide I still want that divorce?" she asked. "If I take my daughter and my trust fund and disappear?" "Then I won't stop you," Victor said quietly. "I won't hunt you down. Won't threaten you. Won't use the baby as leverage. You'll be free to go, with my blessing and my protection for as long as you need it." He paused. "But I'm hoping you won't want to. I'm hoping you'll give us a real chance." Before Isabella could respond, her phone buzzed. Dr. Chen calling from the hospital. "The baby's stable," the doctor reported when Isabella answered. "She's in the NICU, on oxygen support, but her vitals are good. She's a fighter, Isabella, small but strong. You should rest, recover, and then come see her when you're ready. She's going to be fine." The relief was so overwhelming that Isabella started crying. Not delicate tears, but great racking sobs that shook her entire body. All the stress of the past days, all the fear and exhaustion and pain came pouring out in a flood she couldn't control. Victor held her through it, his arms careful around her damaged body, his presence solid and real. And for the first time in 6 years, Isabella let herself believe that maybe she wasn't alone in this fight. Maybe she'd finally found someone who could stand beside her instead of above her. The war with the Volkovs moved swiftly after that. The Commission struck coordinated attacks across 3 countries, hitting the Volkov family's financial infrastructure, their supply chains, their political connections. It was brutal, efficient, and comprehensive. Within a week, Dmitry Volkov was arrested by Interpol on charges of arms trafficking and money laundering. Within 2 weeks, his organization was fractured beyond repair, his remaining loyalists either dead or imprisoned. The evidence Isabella had gathered, the financial records, the communications, the witness testimony, had been the foundation for everything. The Commission used it to justify their actions to law enforcement, painting themselves as concerned citizens helping bring down a dangerous criminal enterprise. It was a masterful piece of political theater, and it worked. Victor's reputation not only recovered, but grew stronger. The man who'd survived assassination attempts, exposed a foreign infiltration, and unified the Commission was no longer just another crime boss. He was a legend, a survivor, a strategist who'd outmaneuvered enemies on multiple fronts. But Isabella knew the truth. Victor hadn't done any of that alone. She'd been the strategist, the planner, the one who'd seen the patterns and connected the dots. And for the first time, Victor acknowledged that publicly. At the Commission's victory dinner 2 weeks after the baby's birth, he'd stood and raised his glass. "To my wife," he'd said, his voice carrying across the room, "who saved us all, who saw threats I was too blind to notice, who proved that intelligence and strategy matter more than brute force. Isabella Moretti is the reason the Volkovs failed, and she's the reason we're standing here tonight instead of attending funerals." The applause had been genuine. The respect in the family head's eyes had been real. Isabella had finally become visible, not as Victor's wife, not as a decoration or a pawn, but as a power in her own right. The baby, they'd named her Sophia after Isabella's mother, thrived despite her early arrival. She spent 3 weeks in the NICU, growing stronger each day, learning to breathe without assistance, to feed on her own, to survive in a world that had tried to kill her before she was even born. Isabella spent every possible moment at her daughter's bedside, talking to her, touching her through the incubator's openings, willing her to live. And Sophia did live, small but fierce, fragile but determined. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn will. By the time the doctors cleared her to go home, she'd gained almost 2 pounds and was breathing perfectly on her own. Home wasn't the burned estate. That had been demolished, the land sold to a developer who would build condos for people who'd never know what had happened there. Instead, Victor had purchased a new property, smaller than the old estate, but more defensible, with security systems that incorporated every lesson Isabella had taught him about vulnerability. More importantly, the new house had been purchased in both their names: joint ownership, joint control. The first of many changes Victor had made to prove he was serious about partnership. He'd given Isabella full access to the organization's finances, let her sit in on strategy meetings, asked for her opinion on personnel decisions and business expansions. At first, the soldiers had been skeptical, uncertain how to treat the boss's wife, who was suddenly their boss too. But Isabella had won them over the same way she'd mapped the empire: by paying attention, by understanding what they needed, by proving that she could think strategically about problems they faced. 3 months after Sophia's birth, Isabella stood in the nursery of their new home, holding her daughter while the baby slept. The room was painted a soft yellow, filled with the expensive but tasteful furniture that people of their position were expected to have. But tucked in the corner was a rocking chair that had belonged to Isabella's mother, one of the few things she'd kept from her old life. She sat in that chair now, rocking gently, Sophia warm and solid against her chest. "She's gotten so big," Victor said from the doorway. He'd taken to checking on them multiple times a night, as if needing to confirm they were both real, both safe, both his. "She has her father's appetite," Isabella said with a small smile. "And her mother's timing. She only wakes up when I'm trying to accomplish something important." Victor moved into the room, careful to keep his voice low so as not to disturb the baby. "I got word from our Moscow contacts. Dmitry Volkov was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide." Isabella knew it wasn't suicide, knew that Victor had reached across the world to eliminate the last threat to their family. Part of her should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the casual brutality of it. But she wasn't that person anymore. Maybe she never had been. "Good," she said simply. "Now it's really over." "Is it?" Victor sat on the ottoman beside the rocking chair. "The Volkovs are finished, yes, but there will always be someone else. Another family looking for weakness, another opportunist thinking they can take what we've built. This world doesn't allow for peace, Isabella, only temporary truces. Then we'll handle them when they come. Together." Isabella looked down at Sophia's sleeping face. "But we're not going to raise our daughter in constant fear. We're going to build something better than what we inherited, something that can survive us." "A legitimate business empire," Victor said thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that. The organization has always had some legal operations. What if we expanded those, gradually transitioned away from the criminal enterprises toward legitimate business? The Commission would see that as weakness, betrayal even. The Commission is changing too. Half the families are already diversifying into legal operations, real estate, restaurants, import-export businesses. The old ways are dying, Isabella. We can either die with them or evolve." Victor's hand found hers. "But I need you to help me do it. Need your strategic mind figuring out how to make the transition without getting killed by hardliners who want things to stay the same." Isabella considered the proposal. It would take years, maybe decades. The kind of long-term planning that required patience and precision and the willingness to play a game where the end game was measured in generations, not months. It was exactly the kind of challenge she'd been preparing for her entire life. "We'll need to start small," she said, her mind already mapping possibilities. "Identify which operations can be transitioned most easily, build relationships with legitimate business partners, create separation between the criminal enterprises and the legal ones so that when we eventually divest from the criminal side, we're not exposed legally. I'll set up meetings with our lawyers and accountants, get them working on structure and planning." Victor leaned back, a smile playing at his lips. "You know what's funny? 6 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. Thought I knew how the world worked, what power looked like, how to maintain control. And then my quiet little wife turned out to be the most dangerous person in my life." "I was never your quiet little wife," Isabella corrected. "I was just waiting for the right moment to stop pretending. And I'm glad you did, even if it meant burning my house down and destroying my sense of reality in the process." Victor's expression grew serious. "I'm not going to pretend I'm perfect, Isabella. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to fall back into old patterns. I'm going to do things that make you want to divorce me and take our daughter and disappear. I know. But I'm also going to try. Every day I'm going to try to be the partner you deserve, the father Sophia deserves. And when I fail, because I will fail, I'm hoping you'll tell me instead of just planning my destruction in silence." Isabella looked at him, this complicated man who'd been both her jailer and her unexpected ally. She'd spent 6 years studying him, mapping his weaknesses, preparing to destroy him if necessary. And now she was choosing to build something with him instead. It was terrifying. It was risky. It required a level of trust she'd sworn never to give anyone. But as she looked down at Sophia's peaceful face, Isabella realized that some things were worth the risk. Some futures were worth fighting for, even if the path was uncertain. "I'll tell you," she promised, "and you'll listen. That's the deal. Real partnership means real communication, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable." "Deal." Victor extended his hand, formal and slightly absurd given the context. But Isabella shook it anyway, sealing their agreement the way business deals had been sealed for generations. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges from rival families who saw their transition to legitimacy as weakness. There would be federal investigations as law enforcement tried to build cases against them. There would be internal conflicts as soldiers, loyal to the old ways, resisted change. But Isabella had spent her entire life preparing for difficult paths, had learned from her father that survival required constant adaptation, had discovered through her own experience that the most dangerous weapon wasn't a gun or a knife, but the ability to think 3 steps ahead of everyone trying to destroy you. She'd mapped one empire. Now she'd build another. One that her daughter could inherit without the blood and violence that had defined previous generations. One that would transform the Moretti name from a symbol of fear into a symbol of power wielded responsibly. It would take time, would require patience and precision and the willingness to play a long game, but Isabella had always been good at long games, had proven she could wait years for the perfect moment to strike. This time, though, she wouldn't be striking to destroy. She'd be building to create, and that made all the difference. Sophia stirred in her arms, making the small mewling sounds that meant she'd wake soon and demand feeding. Isabella stood carefully, carrying her daughter toward the changing table. "I've got it," Victor said, surprising her. "You should rest. You've been up with her twice already tonight." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He took Sophia with practiced care. He'd gotten good at this over the past 3 months, had thrown himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he'd once reserved for business. "Besides, I need the practice. You're not going to be doing everything alone anymore, remember? Partnership means sharing the burdens." Isabella watched him change Sophia's diaper with competent efficiency, talking to the baby in a soft voice that no one outside this room would ever hear. The feared crime boss reduced to cooing at an infant. It should have been absurd. Instead, it was oddly touching. This was her family now. Imperfect, dangerous, built on compromises and strategic alliances, but real in ways that mattered. She'd started this journey as Isabella Russo, the invisible daughter of a criminal accountant, sold into marriage to save her father's life. She'd become Isabella Moretti, the quiet wife who mapped an empire while pretending to arrange flowers. And now she was evolving again into something new. A mother, a partner, a strategist working to transform violence into something resembling legitimacy. The girl who'd been powerless had become the woman who held an empire's future in her hands, and the man who'd once seen her as property had learned to see her as an equal. It wasn't the fairy tale ending people imagined when they thought about love and marriage. There were no declarations of eternal devotion, no promises that everything would be perfect from now on. Just 2 damaged people choosing to build something together because the alternative, spending their lives alone and afraid, was worse. As Isabella watched Victor feed their daughter in the quiet of the nursery, she allowed herself to feel something she'd never permitted before. Hope. Not naive hope that ignored reality, but strategic hope that acknowledged the dangers while believing that change was possible, that people could evolve, that empires built on blood could be transformed into something better. The silent queen who'd spent years in invisible warfare had finally won her war, not through destruction, but through transformation, not by defeating her enemies, but by turning the most dangerous one into an ally. And as dawn light began filtering through the nursery windows, Isabella Moretti stood at the threshold of a future she'd built with her own hands. A future where her daughter would grow up knowing her mother's strength, where partnership meant more than possession, where power was wielded with purpose instead of just violence. The long game was complete. The quiet betrayal had become a quiet revolution, and the woman who'd started with nothing had gained everything that mattered.